earlier on in my career, like I looked at the model of masculine leadership and I tried to emulate that. And I'll tell you, the result of me just like embodying this very kind of more like direct, sometimes even I would say like aggressive, less emotional, masculine leadership led me to just like a complete breakdown.
Like I've got friends who worked in like the finance world, for instance, or law, and they're like, man, there is no empathy and care, like people being berated because they had a child and they took 2 weeks off.
Because I had all these other things that I was holding and what I would consider like the feminine principles and the feminine energy within me, and I wasn't nourishing that, and then it's like a snapping. I think a good company is like, as much as they try to like break that mold and pattern, what we have to understand is like the capitalist society and the businesses, they're built on that very masculine energy of which we're talking about.
What does this moment call for? Welcome to the Authentic Man podcast. I am your host, David Chambers. This is a podcast for men who want more and less from life. More deep connection, more emotional intelligence, more self-awareness, and more great sex. And less heartache, less conflict, less overthinking, and less stress. Creating dating lives, sex lives, and relationships that are incredible and authentic. My deepest goal is that you, the listener, can take away what you hear in this podcast and apply it to your life so that you can experience greater happiness, transformational growth, deeper relationships, and profound sexual intimacy. I believe that as men, we are capable of so much more depth than we are shown or led to believe. So join me as we get deep into this. Welcome back to another episode of the Authentic Man podcast. I am your host, David Chambers. I'm a men's dating, relationship, intimacy coach, and I also help men in the areas of the topic we're talking about today, masculine leadership, leading themselves, self-leadership, and all those sorts of things. And today our episode is really, it's about this new paradigm of masculine leadership in companies, which is really necessary, right? Which is incredibly necessary. We also touch about masculine leadership in relationship in parts. And I talked to someone I've known for a long time in a very different guise initially, Jack Villiers. We first met when I was working in the tech world he was trying to place me somewhere. And he was trying to place some people, I think, in the company that I was working at the time, at Porter. And it just happened like last year, we reconnected. We both did a talk for International Men's Day, actually. Last year, we were both on a panel talk and we had a beautiful conversation, and we've just kept in contact. And I'm really glad to have him on the episode because a lot of his work has been in companies and working in positions of leadership and training and teaching leaders and CEOs and those people who are founding companies in how to lead, how to create beautiful culture in companies. And he has a really unique view on masculine leadership, not just because was in the tech industry in its booming years or past booming years way back, 10, 15 years ago, but also he's now really stepped into a space of doing a lot of men's work and teaching co-ed work, right, between men and women. So, and also still training and helping leaders in their world. So we talk a lot about the kind of necessary skills for this modern, healthy masculine leadership. Like what do you need? What are the different points? How do you lead yourself? How do you embody self-leadership, like healthy masculine self-leadership? We talk about the old model of masculine leadership in companies and how that's toxic and how that hurts people and it actually creates huge amounts of stress. We talk about stress, actually, and we talk about how we help our clients with stress, how we help them beat stress. That's a really important part, because I know that when you become a leader in any capacity, you start to experience a lot of stress as well. And then we talk a lot about the different aspects, like I said, of the masculine leadership and whether that's range and capacity, feeling, expression, knowing how to respond to different moments in different ways. And we also talk about how we can bring in some of these work structures that work so really well at work, bring them into your relationship for success. And I talk about a particular structure that me and my partner also have used that's really helped. And we also talk about how you can bring relationship structures into work as well. This is a fantastic episode. If you're a guy and you listen to this and you're like, I want to work with David, I got a couple of spots open for one-to-one work as well. Like I said, I've been doing a lot of stuff with men who are leading and dealing with a lot of stress, whether that's stress in their relationship and stress in their work life, and had some wonderful, wonderful results with a number of my clients. So if you're interested in that, just drop me a message. All my details are in the show notes. But without further ado, I'll let you get into the episode. Welcome back, listeners. And today I have a really interesting episode for you with somebody who I actually know from my previous life, my previous world as working in IT, and through a really coincidental and godly synchronicity brought us together over a panel talk that we did last year on International Men's Day, talking about the struggles that men have and so forth. I have with me today Jack, and Jack was many years ago when I first met Jack. He was in a very different role to what he does now. How are you doing, brother?
Yeah, I'm good, man. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I feel that this is like one of those ones where it's like, wow, like we've come through some major timelines to be here now doing what we're doing in comparison to like when I think about when I would have first met you, and I'm just like, wow, yeah, it's like nostalgic in a really nice and affirming way.
yeah. It's really, actually, maybe we'll start off there as maybe telling the story of yourself and like the work that your journey into this work, because I know you do some really beautiful work, and I'll let you talk about that, but it's a far cry from where you kind of started out.
Yeah. Well, I'll say the story of how I met you, and then it came back around, and then I'll go from kind of the beginning. So, I used to have also a kind of life working in like IT in the city. I was more on like the sales recruiting side. And I remember I was running an event at Net-a-Porter, the fashion brand, one night. And, I worked in IT. I was young. I didn't often meet people who I would say were maybe like-minded and kind of like embracing the more urban culture that I came from. And I remember rolling up to this event and seeing you wearing like some Jordan 3s, I think they were. And I was like, oh, this guy seems cool, and had like a little interchange. Then also realized when we started speaking again recently, how many times I was like up in your inbox trying to find you a job in IT, like, hey man, do you want this job at this really cool tech company? And then obviously, when I got approached to be on this panel for International Men's Day, and they were like, yeah, you're going to be with this other guy, does men's work, leadership work, David Chambers. And I was like, David Chambers. And then I saw the picture and I was like, it's that guy. And I feel that in life, the beautiful synchronicities are just like they sprinkle the magic to life. So that's the origin story of this podcast. Little bit about me. I grew up actually, let's talk about today. So today what I do is I'm a leadership coach. I'm a guide. I work with men. More recently, I've also started working with men and women together. And I do a lot of speaking, mainly around the topics of masculinity, mental health. Leadership is something that's really important to me. It's really like a pinnacle part of my life, how I approach my life, like thinking of how do I approach life like a leader. I have a background working in a lot of tech companies, doing leadership, changing organizations, culture, all of that stuff. And then really my own kind of healing journey led me to this place where what I do now is really help people create a deeper relationship with themselves. And I believe that once we cultivate that deep relationship with ourselves, then really that's how we change our outer world. So our relationships with others, our relationships with narratives, with stories, with the vision that we have for the world. And really I found myself on this path, growing up. My father wasn't around. He was a drug addict, an alcoholic. He had been adopted, had like a whole kind of traumatic story that he was carrying. And I remember growing up without a father and always just feeling this curiosity around like, what is a male role model? What is masculinity? What is like leadership mean, as well as being a man in this earth? And that was always a gap for me. And I think having that gap and that lack led me to end up getting involved in a lot of crime, a lot of violence. Really just found myself like on the wrong side of the tracks. And I was really lucky. I mean, I call it luck and also, hard work, that I managed to like don't know how, wangle my way into like a city career that then gave me some like material success. But even as I went on that journey, I still felt that lack because I hadn't really built that relationship with myself. And when I found men's work, initially through Sacred Sons, who I do a lot of work with and lead a lot of experiences with today, that just really opened my heart to what the possibilities of being a man was. And through that journey, and then pivoting my career out of the corporate world more into this kind of like leadership, personal development world, it's yeah, really brought me to where I am today. And yeah, I feel really just grateful, you know, for like the trials, for the tribulations, for the synchronicities, and just to be here now doing what I'm doing.
Incredible, man. I didn't know the full kind of extent of your story, and like going through that with you with your father and observing, and also like there's like a internal battle, isn't it? Of you kind of know this about your father to be true, and there must have been a part of you as you were growing up in and being like, I don't want to end up like that. There's kind of part of your mind that's thinking that, I imagine.
And the pinnacle of that was I became a father at 23. So I should have said that in my introduction. Like one of my biggest, you know, I try not to overly identify with too many things. I try and just be free flowing with what life gives me and know that I'm going to evolve and change. But to me, being a father, and when I had my daughter when I was about 23, that was the moment where everything changed, you know, and it makes me feel emotional saying it now, but really until I saw her eyes when she was born, I didn't always feel like I had something to live for. It always felt like even though I was getting in a better life situation than I had grown up in, this darkness kind of always would sort of emerge within me that then didn't, you know, it kind of felt like it was pulling me back. It didn't want me to live. And my daughter was a massive part of that. And unfortunately, the relationship with her mother was very, very difficult. You know, she had her things, I had my things. And, you know, 23, young, both dealing with your shit and also then trying to be parents when you haven't been together that long. And I just remember this key moment, which is where I think when we talk about like generational trauma and how it can be transmuted, or you hear people talking about cycle breakers, that I knew after about a year of my daughter being born that I had to leave the relationship. But to me, that felt like if I left, even though it was really not the right place for me to be, it felt like I was just like my father. It was just that was the wound, you know. It was like if I leave, I'm him. It doesn't matter that I'm not a drug addict right now, or I'm not this, or I'm not that. If I leave, I'm just like him. And it was that moment when I decided that I'm going to leave, but I'm not going to be like him. I'm going to be present in her life, which I am. I'm going to completely, you know, keep transforming and working on myself to be the best father I can be. And I'm always going to just show up for her. And when that moment happened, that was like the alchemizing of my father's story within me. And I know that now so deeply when I look at my daughter and I look at my son and I say, yes, they will have their journey, they will have their challenges, but I know that they won't have to carry that story that I had, and that my dad being adopted and abandoned by his father and mother, you know, it's we have these moments in life where we can just really stop that. So yeah, it's a profound one for me.
Yeah, it's a beautiful moment because you, as you said, you realize you're not gonna pass that baton on to them. They're gonna have a different transmission in their life. They're not gonna have to this, like you said, generational trauma. It's funny, I was talking to my mum about generational trauma a couple of months ago. And in my family, the fatherlessness goes back as far as anyone can actually tell me. You know, like my mum never met her dad. My dad's dad was really absent in his life. My dad's dad, as far as I know, was like, he was there, but he just was miserable and unhappy and didn't want kids really. And it's like, you may be the first person in this side of your lineage to go, I'm going to consciously make a different choice. I'm going to choose something different. And in that, like you said, in that moment to be like, I'm leaving the relationship, but I'm here. I'm going to be present. I'm going to show up. I'm going to be there for them. I'm going to show them all of who I am. So they can go and then they can almost like, I almost call it like levels, like a computer game. You complete that level. So the next level they go to, it's a new experience, and they're going to have, like you said, they're going to have their own difficulties, but it's not going to be this same level that's been repeating for generations.
Exactly. Yeah. And just, you know, becoming a father at that age and everything, like when I think about all the work that I do now, whether it's with, you know, CEOs, whether it's on retreats, whether it's going and doing workshops in organizations, it's like fatherhood has just taught me so much that, you know, I guess the way I describe it is like, people get to a certain age and it's quite common. You go on like your gap year and you go explore, or people who maybe go on, like a path of personal development. They might go to the jungle and experience plant medicines, or go and have these initiations or these rites of passages. And I always say this, but my initiation was fatherhood. That was my rite of passage, and just walking through that fire. And I kind of see now, like when I do my work, I'm like, oh, well, I have that capacity, or I have that ability because my daughter actually gifted me that through becoming a dad so young. So yeah, I think the more that we can like integrate these life experiences into the work we do today, then we're just, sharing more gifts that we can possibly offer with the people that we work with.
And as you said, you can take those gifts into other areas, being a father, as you said, it's enabled you to bring in rage and capacity into other areas of your life, not just in fatherhood.
Yeah, 100%.
Beautiful, man. I love that. And I mean, I changed tact a little bit and get into a bit around kind of what you've seen of men in kind of companies and organizations. Like, because, you've worked in, we worked in the tech world. It was 90% men. The higher you go up, the more men there are. And, you've been in it as long as I was. And I'd love to maybe dive into, when you look back at the beginnings of your career, what you were seeing, like, was this kind of standard model of leadership from men in these sorts of companies and these sorts of spaces that you were in.
Yeah, I think we both have a lot of probably similar stories to tell here. I'll talk about it through my own eyes. I always felt that natural inclination to be a leader, and then I went to all these amazing, very fast-growing tech companies, and especially earlier on in my career, like I looked at the model of masculine leadership, and I thought, okay, if I'm like really direct, if I'm kind of like less emotional, I would say. I wouldn't say always like completely non-empathetic. I wouldn't say that it's always the case. I have seen that. But yeah, like less emotions, more direct, more structure, more just like do, all of that kind of stuff. I'm going to be successful. And definitely the earlier companies I worked in, that's really what I saw. So I feel like, it's again, it's like a generational thing. If we look at like, we go as far back as like the industrial boom of civilization, we created a society where all of our belief systems were based that kind of like academic and logic and like these very sort of like, I don't know, directness, strength, being strong, those kind of principles is what good leadership and like, dominating and winning meant. And I feel like as time's gone on and what I saw is like, we've had that model, but it just doesn't work anymore. Like that's the reality. So I saw that and I tried to emulate that. And I'll tell you the result of me just like embodying this very kind of more like direct, sometimes even I would say like aggressive, less emotional, masculine leadership led me to just like a complete breakdown, because I was kind of going on, putting the mask on, pretending to be this person, leading, being successful, the numbers, are we getting there? Are we winning? Am I making money? All of that, what I now know is bullshit, in my opinion. And then it left me just completely empty and out of gas, because I had all these other things that I was holding and what I would consider like the feminine principles and the feminine energy within me. And I wasn't nourishing that. And then it's like a snapping, because it's like you can't live, if you can only live for so long in a healthy way if you're completely neglecting one side of yourself. So the way that I've kind of then seen that leadership evolve to today, and this is really when I work, especially with men in leadership who have, maybe 100 people working for them, they're running a company, that kind of thing, is I always say, and we spoke a little bit about this before we started, but like your emotional capacity and your range and your ability to be vulnerable and your ability to like, yes, okay, be direct and be forward moving, whatever, when you need, but also to be like in surrender to things, to letting things flow, to be sustainable, to all of those things. Like when you find that balance and that range, that's the like mode or the model rather of leadership that we need today. Like that's what the world is asking for. So yeah, that's kind of like the evolution that I've seen and experienced firsthand.
Yeah. And that I can talk about my own experience of seeing leadership. I look back to my first kind of career, like one of my first jobs when I was like 22, and it was like all men in leadership positions. There was, like you said, it's all very direct, very as kind of gruff, very short. There was like you said, actually, I think it's an important part. I think in tech, there's always been like an element of like empathy and care towards people up to a point.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've got friends who worked in like the finance world, for instance, or or law, and they're like, man, there is no empathy and care. Like, you know, people being berated because they had a child and they took 2 weeks off, or they're like, well, you know, maybe you can take a different 2 weeks off. And they're like, well, I want to take the 2 weeks off after they're born, kind of thing. But like I saw a lot of, like you said, direct, very logical. Everything was very logical, very intellectual, to a point of like going to like intellectualizing and logicking everything, even when it didn't need to be. And that kind of like dominating. But there was also there's certain type of leadership I used to see in middle management. And I wonder if you've seen this, is like they're men who were, well, for want of a better term, this is how I describe them. They were probably bullied at school because they were really nerdy, right? And they're very smart. They got really good degrees in like physics and mathematics and computer science. And then they have some power, right, in these tech jobs that they have because they're like developers. They become lead developers. They become managers, but they're devoid of personal skills, like, you know, interpersonal skills. So the way that they manage is them just wielding power in the way that like they've never really, so they can be really quite mean to people at times, like very condescending, using their logic to kind of like diminish and belittle other people. I'm not saying it was all the place I worked in, but I did see this quite often, people being promoted into management, and you're like, this person shouldn't manage people. They could manage process, but they should never manage people, right? But just because that's the next step in the ladder, and it sometimes create quite toxic environments, especially like, you know, I worked in software development teams, and you'd be in this team and you'd be like, oh my God, I have to speak to the lead dev. Oh, this is going to be horrible. Or I need to speak to this architect. Oh God, like it's going to be an absolutely painful experience because he can't explain anything in these simple terms. But I see this other strange piece in these same men where if we went to like a bar after work, they were almost like quite scared little boys, because it's like when they're outside of their standard environment, they have no power in the bar, and they kind of revert back to how they are in the world, which is like afraid of the world, afraid of people and how they interact with them. I'm not sure if that's something that you saw.
So many times. so many times. Yeah. And no, totally. It's like what sometimes happens is, you know, and I have empathy for someone in that situation, because you go to school and like maybe you're given the gift of being very academic and very systems thinking, and then you're bullied for that because that's like, again, you're a nerd then, or something like that. And then it's like, because they never kind of like heal from that, like you said, you then come into an environment where you're given power, and actually what you have is kind of what's dictating the level of powers. But I spent my life working with software engineers, like, so this is very, and then, you know, all of that, what it is, it's a repression of the emotions that were never processed. And then they're just being spat out sideways, because I feel that when you have, again, you know, I described it within myself as like a lack, or like, you know, you can either have this feeling of like you're holding stuff bottled up, and also there's like a bit of emptiness. Well, I feel that when people are feeling these things, they have to keep feeding that energy that's trapped within them, you know? And the way that they feed that is like, okay, well, I'm going to dominate, I'm going to do this. And then when they get into an environment where it again shines a light on that wound that they have, it's like, oh shit, I'm like that 10-year-old boy in the playground again who like no one wanted to chat to me or whatever. So it's like the piece that comes up for me when I think about this is like, why are we not teaching in schools, as far back as schools, why are we not teaching more about emotions and intuition and all of these things? It's like, to get to the level where you want to study that, you have to get to do like a psychology degree. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. It's nuts.
Yeah, yeah.
There's nothing in there, you know? So it's not a surprise to me, especially with the very, you know, industries like we worked in, like tech, where it's very academic. So yeah, I'm kind of going on to, I guess, what I feel the solution is, but it's like, yeah, how do we, and even in organizations as well, how do we bring in more training that's around like the emotional center within the body and that? Because when you get that, and then you've got the academics, then you're like, an amazing leader. You know, you can be like the best of both worlds, is how I see it.
Yeah, yeah. There's this, and I think it kind of affects men worse, right? Because that's something I also saw through my tech career, was that at the beginning there was very few women around, and as things kind of shifted and changed and tech became a bit more cool, you know, you had these cool companies, you know, that like had nice logos and stuff, and it wasn't just like just nerdy guys in a room, and it became a bit more cool and hipster, especially towards the last kind of 5 to 7 years of my career. There was a lot more women in there, and there's a lot more like UX and so forth, things that were more design orientated. And I noticed that the leadership style from women was often a bit more nurturing and so forth, right? But what I saw was, as men, we really struggle in this area because, you know, there's a socialized out of us for a young age, you know, the stuff around the man box and our emotional capacity. And I see it in many different ways. Like I see it through, you know, some of the men I work with, they are leaders in their companies, and they are, I've got 1 or 2 clients who are software developers as well.
I thought you would.
And they're a bit stunted in this way. And, but what was interesting to me was seeing the female leaders who bring that nurturing, and they do bring that kind of emotion and feeling and that intuition and into the business, which I think is really beautiful. But like, as you said, that piece for men around like feeling, being in contact with their feelings and then being in contact with someone else's, and not just being about process and money and numbers, is often a struggle because, you know, we still measure success in companies really by the amount of revenue, money, new customers. It's all very like, it's all very structured, very masculine. Like, oh, we've made more money, we need to get more funding. Like, so the drive of the company is very much about, well, things that are heartless in many ways, right? You know, money doesn't have a soul to it. You know, the new customers as a metric isn't really like, oh, how many customers are we making happy? That isn't the thing. It's like, how many people have we acquired? It's conquering, it's dominating, it's winning still, the metrics of so many companies and their leadership teams.
Yeah. And this hits like a big philosophical kind of piece for me, because I worked at some very, very progressive companies, as you said. Like in my consulting career, I was at Monzo. Then I did a whole host of startups. And my job, I was like a head of people, head of HR, you might call it more traditionally. And so my job was actually to like define the culture, build the performance, build the values, inclusion, diversity. Like that was I was in that epicenter, right? And the thing that I kind of realized to what you just said, like as much as the companies, even the ones I worked for that I think are good companies, like as much as they try to like break that mold and pattern, what we have to understand is like the capitalist society and the businesses, they're built on that very masculine energy of which we're talking about. So it's like, it's all well and good trying to be super progressive, doing all this stuff, whatever, you're making progress and it's welcomed. If people can have a better experience at work where they spend all of their time, then I'm happy, right? Like that was my job, you know? But at the bottom line, when it comes to like, oh, money's running out or funding or the VCs are putting pressure on, that's the core of that energy. And when I spoke about linking that to like the original, when we created industrial like society and all of that kind of stuff. So it's a difficult one, you know, my kind of like wish for that whole world. And when I look at the tech world, is like, you know, can we be like really honest about what it is? And from that place of honesty, can there be more changes? Because the whole world right now, we can see quite clearly is suffering from that I don't even call it toxic masculinity anymore. I call it out of balanced masculinity. You know, it's all consumerism, dominate, win, all of that kind of stuff. So it's like, when that's at the core, it's quite difficult, however much you dress it up and make it progressive and we're doing this on top. You know, I'm not saying it's not good to have more women in tech, for example, but still, if the core is kind of rotten, then how much progress will we make? Am I sounding a bit dark now? I'm being like doomsday.
No, because I agree with you, man. Like I worked at a company, I'll name them. I worked at a company called Farm Drop, and I loved the ethos. I loved the CEO. I always remember my interview, and we just kind of talked about my travels. Basically, I'd just come back from traveling for 2 years, and it was a beautiful company to work for. And there was a lot of care for the staff, and like being really interested in our customers and really interesting in where our products were coming from. They basically sourced like farm fresh food from around the UK and brought it to people in London.
I used to order from them.
Wonderful food, man.
They were great.
They were so great.
Yeah.
And in the end, like you said, it came down to is like we're running out of money, right? The VCs, even though they were like, you know, high impact VC, blah, 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 they were still like, where's the fucking money? Like, where's the fucking money? Are you making money? Are you getting new customers? And then I would say the companies tried to grow too quickly, too big, because that's what was the pressure that was being put on them. But in fact, it started to cause issues around, you know, delivery and all sorts of things. So it lost the customer experience. So like the very feminine part of the company, which was the experience that people were having, the customers, the joy and love that they were receiving, became secondary to the money that was being made. And in the end, that was the demise of the company, in my opinion, that there was so much like make more money, make the numbers bigger, that customers started to have a worse experience. And from a premium product, right, people want a fucking exemplary experience. And I look back and I really feel sorry for some of the management, like the CEO, a guy called Ben, and his heart was so in the right place, right? So in the right place. But the pressure that he is receiving from around him didn't allow him to do what was actually do what he would have wanted to do, which was like, let's bring balance to the masculine structure and the need for making money and profit. But let's really also make sure that our clients are looked after, our customers are really looked after, our staff are really well nurtured, which we were really beautifully looked after. Like, and it was one of those, probably the first company I ever worked in that I felt like they had a good balance. But as things started to get stretched, the thing that became a priority was the money and making more money. And it was like, I remember kind of observing it. I remember at one point the head of tech changed, and there's a guy that came in from like, you know, blue chip type of, he'd worked in like corporate big companies. He turned up in every day he turned up in a suit, right? That's how he dressed. Whereas the rest of us were like, in the office, I'd walk around in like a vest and a pair of shorts and sometimes walking around barefoot. And as the company started to veer that way, it was like, it's changing. And we would just get told, you know, this is what maturing looks like. But it's like, actually, this is what the corporate world thinks we have to be to succeed. And it's a really sad part of companies because they also then lose the soul, you know, the meaning behind what they're doing. And I'm sure this is something that you probably saw a lot, like companies who are like, we want our customers to have a great experience and to feel good and to feel looked after and let's be really caring about them. But when the pressure's on, like people are like, we need to make more fucking money.
That's it, right? And it's like you said, most companies I've worked at, the reason I've chosen to work at them is that they started with the best intentions, you know, they really have. And then it's gone. It's like you can only kind of stay in that space for so long until like the root of how things are set up start to kind of pull into it. And like you said, things have to start to change. And it kind of segues me to a piece that was coming up for me when you were saying that about like the CEO particularly, that, you know, the reason I choose, especially to try and work with men in leadership now is I do believe like, although I'm not a politician, I can't go and change like the system and structure and what we value as a society. But what I can do is I can work with people that have a, you know, impact in the sense that they lead, you know, maybe they have a staff of 100 people, whatever it is. And I know that if there's a man there in leadership and if I can get him more connected to his emotions, more balanced with his masculine and his feminine, if I can get him, you know, yes, living in the reality of the company that he's running and what needs to be done and what success looks like, but doing it in a way that creates like this, you know, I call it like the ripple effect, right? It's like you see when a man changes and whether it's his and same for women, but whether it's his family or his employees or whatever, like they feel the ripple of him coming more into balance and being more in alignment. And that's why, like, when I think about service and contribution, I'm like that's a good place for me to work, you know, with these kind of men, because I have been in that position myself, feeling that stress or like, I want to do it this way, but like, they're just saying, no, it's like, you got to make these 20 people redundant, whatever the thing was at the time. So yeah, I think ultimately, you know, it is a bit of a change one human at a time and then see the ripple effects of that. And, you know, then I hope that like at the root, you know, the more that the world struggles with that energy kind of being the dominating force, you know, things are going to buckle and it's going to be like, okay, things have to change now. And it's, you know, it's all good. It's all necessary. It's all part of the experience, but it's, it's kind of like it's intense, right? It's intense that's the world that we live in, but it is what it is.
Are you seeing from your work with these sorts of men, with these leaders, that there is like a change that actually is occurring at a kind of top level, or are you seeing that like it's very sporadic?
I think like within the sphere of what they can control, so that's just like changing themselves, I see that happening. Like often I will say I'll be working with an executive or a CEO or whatever, and they'll work with me because they'll be like, oh, okay, been referred to Jack, high performance, grown companies very fast, knows a lot about leadership, whatever. So, they'll be drawn to work with me because of that. Maybe not as much knowing, although I don't hide it, that I do a lot more like deep kind of ceremony, spiritual, cathartic work with men and women as well. And then, we'll be on the first two calls and it's like, how do I become the best CEO? How do I like hit this? Are the goals aren't working? This isn't working. And then by the third session, it's like, we're talking about something that happened in their childhood, So it's like, I guess specifically for the men, yes, I think within what they can control, like even if they don't know they want it, they can start to change in like a wider context. Yeah, I mean, it's for me, it's probably too hard to say. Like I see pockets of change and things happening and people breaking out the mold and the cycle and doing things differently. But for me, when I look at something like COVID, for example, that for me is an example of like a buckling where the system hasn't worked. It's again, we look at the problem of like COVID and it's like, how do we solve COVID? Well, we've got to fight it. Again, that's like the masculine principle, fight it, dominate it. It's like, no, we can't fight and dominate this. Like that's the same energy that created the thing. So in answer to your question, like, yeah, will like kind of humanity and society like learn that lesson? I think it will, but it will be in pockets and then it will be in like bigger breaks. And eventually, my prayer is that we kind of get there, and it is like, wow, we're like living in a different paradigm now, but yeah, who knows?
It takes time as well, doesn't it? It takes time for these things to change. And I'm similar. See the same thing with what I see with men that I work with is, and often working with men who we're focusing on a relational space, but like where they're the same. They're like getting things done. I have to do, make, in that real strong kind of masculine type of way of being. And then after some conversations, I'm like, why do you believe that you have to be like this? And they're like, well, that's how it works. I'm like, well, that does it. I'm like, does it? Is that how it works? And they're like, well, that's what. And then they'll be like, that's what other people are doing. I was like, well, can you tell me some other people are doing things differently? And then, like you said, you get to some part of them and it's like, oh, but yeah, this is how my father was with me. And, that worked for him. I'm like, did it work for him? You get to these quite tender moments and they're like, oh shit, no, it didn't work for him. Yeah. Like he neglected me, he didn't see me. And you're like, okay, so what's some other ways of being? And I see it, that leaks sometimes into the men I work with, into their work. Like I was speaking to one of my clients yesterday and he runs a design agency that he set up. And when I first met him, he was super stressed. He was just like working all the time. And we were talking yesterday and he was just like, Dave, man, I'm sitting on my bed talking to you at like 12:30. Like, I'm going to go in the office for a few hours and then I'm going to go home again. I'm going to meditate for an hour. And I was like, you see, this is what's possible when you surrender to what you really want and you trust people as well, right? Because I think that's something that we don't see in that kind of, call it unbalanced masculine or immature masculine, is like trust is really lacking of other people, right? There's a kind of micromanaging, controlling. But like when you start to trust and give responsibility to people, like really give responsibility to make decisions, like we can actually start to step back and we all end up with less headache and stress on our shoulders, right? Because, and I'd love to get your take on this, is like, I imagine that one of the most common things you're seeing with the men you're working with, these leaders, is incredibly high levels of stress that they're dealing with.
Yeah, it's like chronic stress. And you know what? The big mantra that comes up for me that's like so simple, but for me is like so potent, is like slow down to speed up. And it's like, however it comes about, as soon as that penny drops, and it's like, and I remember I had this, I was that guy. I was a workaholic. I was like running a consultancy, it was like, oh God, got to get the invoices, And I know now actually, when we talk about the reasons, that was the poor boy that had no money growing up inside of me that was putting such a value on how much money I was making. And if I had a nice Mercedes and all of these things, right? And like, as soon as we slow down to speed up, it's like people associate, especially men often, they're like, oh, but I can't slow down because of this and that and da-da-da-da. And it's like, when you slow down, what happens is you become more precise, you become more potent, you become more nourished, and like you have a deeper level of resilience to like do the things that you need to do. And through slowing down, you can like widen your capacity. And the way that I see it is like with these men, they're like super overwhelmed. They've got this whole story about why they've got to be bouncing from thing to thing to thing to thing and constantly doing. And then as soon as they slow down and do a bit of an inventory on how they're living their life, and especially like from a business perspective, how they're set up, they can start to be like, oh, how can I actually get into a position where I'm in a much better flow? And actually, do I really need to be working like 60 hours a week to achieve what I want to achieve? Well, no, if I just slow down, I can probably optimize a few things. I can ask for help. I can organize a few things, you know? And it's like, I always say that it's like people sacrifice time nourishing themselves. So a lot of people that I work with, I'll start and I'll be like, what's your morning routine like? And they'll be like, you know, I get up, I check my emails before bed, then I check my emails, and women as well that I coach as well. But I check especially entrepreneurs, but I check my emails before bed, and then I got up and I got the kids in this and I did that. And I'm like, whoa, when did you just like check in with how your body was feeling that day? When did you just think about what your intention was for the day? And it doesn't mean you need to be waking up at 5 a.m. and like meditating for 10 hours or any shit like that. Like these are simple pauses, pausing your breath and taking a breath in conversation. So it's like naturally the inclination is to move very fast and it can create overwhelm and stress. But through these beautiful pauses, we can just create like a window of opportunity to adjust ourselves and do things in a better way. So that's, you know, that's always like first base for me, I say with my coaching. It's like, cool, let's just, because often, I don't know if I'd be curious to hear you to hear about this. When people, especially like men, are into that like such intense, like overwhelmed, stressed, overworked state, they can't really create any space for the growth that needs to happen. I don't know if that resonates with you. So it's like, I always say like, hey, the first couple of weeks, like really, we're just going to create space within your nervous system, within your actual life. So then we can actually start to make the adjustments and give you like the awareness within that space. Otherwise you're just like head in the sand. I don't know if that resonates with you.
Yeah. It's a bit like, I often use, I've got a little cactus on my desk and I give them a kind of perspective thing of like, if all you're doing is dealing with what's coming at you straight away, it's like having your hand in front of your face and that's all you can see, right? You can just see the details of your hand, but you need to create some space so you can have a wider view, as you're saying there. And it's like, the funniest thing is when people come to me and they're stressed and they fucking hate this. I'm like, I want you to do less. And they're like, what do you mean I can't do less? I have to do all these things. I'm like, no, you don't. They're like, no, I have to do these things. I'm like, no, you don't. I'm like, what do you think's going to happen if you don't do that thing? No one's going to do it. Like something will go wrong. The business will fail. I was like, I need you to like, trust me that there's a multitude of things in your life that you're doing you don't need to do. And sometimes it takes a while and like, they get into it and they're like, oh shit, yeah, like I don't need to check my email before bed. I don't actually need to check my email more than twice a day, actually, or 3 times a day. Yeah, okay, how much more headspace does that give you? A lot more. All right, cool. Now you with this more headspace that you have, like, are you able to be more present in your meetings? Yeah. Are you forgetting less things? They're like, yeah. And it's this process of, you know, you said it beautifully when you talk about slowing down is a way to speed up. Like what I see with a lot of men is like their attention is so split all the time that they don't really give anything like pure deep presence. So they're always giving things like 10% of their energy in that moment. So they're constantly making small mistakes, right? They think they're doing really well, but they're constantly making tiny mistakes. They're not hearing certain things. They're misinterpreting things. But when they start to have more space because they're slowing down, maybe I give them like a 10-minute meditation in the morning or some breath work, or sometimes I'll give them literally a 2-minute breath work that they can do 2 or 3 times a day. Like when they start to feel stressed, they go in the toilet at work and I'm like, you do this breath and you come back in. Yeah. Or like I take them through, like you said, taking a longer breath. I'm like, when you're sitting in a meeting and someone asks you a question, take 1 breath in and then answer. And they're like, what? I'm like, this, and I practice with them on our calls. Like I ask you a question, don't answer my question straight away. Take a breath in, take a breath out, and then now speak, because you're in a far more grounded place, because it takes us out of reactivity. And if we're in reactivity constantly, right, in work, in our lives, we're not creating something new. We're just recreating what we've recreated before, right? Because we're just reacting to the situation. But when we take a bit of space and we slow down, it's like we let in room for creativity, innovation, and like our own intuition, as we mentioned before, to like actually make decisions from a place that's more aligned with our own kind of deeper values. But when we're just reacting, we're just kind of like replaying our own patterns and stories that we've seen in business and in our lives. And I see that is one of the biggest things that creates stress, is they're like, oh, things aren't moving, things aren't changing. And I'm like, yeah, because you just keep recreating the same fucking bullshit you've been creating for years, you know? And
then there's the guilt. Don't forget the guilt as well.
Yeah.
The guilt is a big one. It's like the cycle goes into the guilt. Oh, but I haven't done this, but I haven't done that, but I sort of do this for her, that. And then you're just in, you know, like you said, you're just in a world of shit.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It's like
just spiraling.
Cycle.
Yeah. And
I was going to just say you're speaking my... Yeah.
What's that?
No, I was going to say you're speaking the language. There's a little thing that I want to sprinkle onto that, which is just to say, just so I don't lose it, is like, I'm not sitting here saying, because I do this work and I coach people and I do this kind of work, that I'm perfect. I get overwhelmed and I get stressed sometimes. But the biggest thing, something that really stuck with me that someone said, is like, you know, if you build the awareness and you start to create the space, it's like, okay, you know that you're going out. I had it literally this last week, you know, my nervous system felt fried. Kids have been off school for summer, like just a lot was happening, moving house. And I just felt it coming up. And it's like, because I've developed the awareness, I was like, okay, something's not working here. How do I adjust? You know? So I think the thing is that we're never going to get to this state as men, to this like perfect state where we don't feel those things. You know, we don't feel the stress and the overwhelm, but it's the choice of when it comes up, have you got that awareness? And then are you willing to make the adjustment? And sometimes the adjustment feels like the brave thing. You know what? I'm actually just going to take half a day today. You know what? Like, is this document I'm writing for my boss really like, do I need to do it right now? Could I just say, hey, could I get 2 more days? This came up, and be human, right? So I just wanted to sprinkle that on, that it's like, you're never going to be perfect, but it's like, once you have the awareness, can you make the adjustment? And keep awareness, adjustment, and then you develop that capability to just like do it organically, which I feel like is, I'm hoping where I'm getting to.
No, man, it's so important, that big, like the awareness piece, because when we're stuck in the stress, our awareness is like quite limited, it's quite small. And like you said there, if we have awareness, we can, it's like you can see the road ahead. You can see the traffic coming, or we can see the crash that could potentially happen in a moment, right? This, you know, we've all had that experience when we're driving. Oh, well, I've definitely had them, where you see a car in front of you and you're like, this car looks fucking unstable. I can see it. I live in
Ibiza. Every car's unstable.
I either need to slow down, or I can overtake the car and just give it a bit of space. And you just like hang back a bit, because you've got that bigger awareness of what's happening, because you've got mental space. And you're like, and then you see the car do something, slow down, almost hit someone else, and you're like, okay, it's cool. I don't even need to get stressed about this. But when we're like in it and we're stressed and we think we need to keep pushing forward, we're going to be right on that car's bumper, you know? And that car does something and boom, we hit the car and we're pissed off. But it's like, we can avoid the crashes, right? When we kind of bring in some of these tools, these slowing down, creating more space, you know, having good routines, really, as you said, taking a real inventory of like, what's really important, like where are we out of integrity as well? Like, am I in integrity with my relationship if I'm working 60 hours a day? You know, am I in integrity of my values around relationship, around my family, if that's how I'm working, or my own body? Am I in integrity of my body if I'm making it work 60 hours a day and I want this body to last me like 60, 70, 80 years? You know, it's these sorts of questions that are bigger than just like making this quarter's sales targets.
Yeah, 100%. There's just a lot. And I mean, I've seen it. I can say it kind of loops all the way back to what we were discussing about like that model of leadership that we've seen a lot in the workplace. And I'm here to tell any men that maybe feel that they're like emulating that model, or that's the only model that they can do, that when you start to make that shift, and slowly, and you're going to fuck it up along the way, that's okay. And you come into a more balanced way of leading yourself, whatever people or things or projects you have to lead, and just being the leader within your own life, you are 10 times more effective. I work way less than I ever have, and I'm more effective because I'm thinking and I'm being aware. and I'm making adjustments and I'm surrendering. When something doesn't work, I'm not trying to like smash down the fucking house. I'm just like, cool, let me just sit back for a sec. Like, why isn't that flowing right now? What is it? Inquiring. And then it's like, oh, is it more directness or ambition that this needs from me? Or is it just it's not flowing right now and I should divert my attention elsewhere? And it's like, I think people often don't feel that there is like something over the hill with this kind of stuff, but like there really is, you know, you've just got to be brave to do the thing that kind of feels counterintuitive, I guess is the way I describe it. It doesn't, it's like, that's the last thing I want to do. I don't want to take like 3 hours to go to like do this thing now. Like, or I don't want to sit here and breathe. Like, I got to fucking send this email, man. And it's like, but it's the investment and it's doing the hard thing. And it just starts to just shift that paradigm and that energy. And then you know, it happens.
And you mentioned there self-leadership. And I think this is a really important kind of point, because we often think about leadership and we often think leadership's about leading others, right? Like, or the frame we often have about leadership, you know, this kind of classical idea of leadership is as we talked about, dominating, but actually like forcing other people to do things a lot of the time. But this idea of self-leadership, as you said there, is like almost more important than the external leadership, right? I'd love you to maybe expand on that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I've always believed, and, you know, I think it's a kind of widely used quote, chopped in different ways and said by different people, but, you know, you can't really effectively lead others until you start leading yourself, or your capacity to lead others is proportionate to your capacity to lead yourself. And for me, it's kind of my definition evolves on what it is, but what self-leadership really means to me is, do I have the ability to meet all of the things that are happening in life? And by the things that are happening in life, I mean my inner world, the emotions I'm experiencing, the challenges, the questions, the existential angst that sometimes comes with life and the unknown. And then, you know, like the relational elements of the people and the things. Do I have the ability to meet that and be fully engaged and fully present with what's going on? And to me, that is like really what self-leadership is. It's like, okay, I'll give you some examples. Like, I'm feeling anxiety, you know, that's something, health anxiety is something I've struggled a lot with over the years. And it's like self-leadership for me in that situation is, can I actually just sit and feel the anxiety in my body and be present with it and start to inquire and understand where it's coming from and what the story is and what's happening? That's leading myself through the experience of that very difficult emotion for me, you know? And then it's like, when I'm able to do that, well, I'm developing again, like a capacity to lead myself with my emotions and to understand myself. And then it's like, when I'm then maybe I'm in a challenging relational space with my partner, it's like, I can call upon that self-leadership, because it's like, well, she's feeling a really difficult emotion. Well, I know how to lead myself through a difficult emotion and engage with it and be present with it. So can I meet her in hers and understand what she needs, you know? So it's like, there's simple ways of saying it, but that's really, for me, it's like, are you engaging? Are you fully present with everything that's going on? Or are you kind of, when we're not leading ourselves, to me, it's like, oh, we're disassociating, we're numbing, we're just like thinking. And sometimes, again, that is going to happen. But yeah, for me, it's that engagement and that presence. And then you're leading yourself, you're the navigator of your own body. My partner said this to me the other day, but she was just like, you know, like, really being a human is just like feeling sensations. You know, that's kind of what it is when we simplify it. So like, I'm on this big piece right now for me where it's like, on the emotional level, it's just like, can I just fucking feel everything? And can I just invite it and embrace it and honor it? And like, that to me is just, from an emotional layer, is just like a deep sense of self-leadership that then when I relate with others, it's like, whoa, okay, that's what this is doing for me, you know?
Oh, I love that. I love your definition of self-leadership, you know, meeting ourselves and leading ourselves through, because it's like that self-leadership it almost is the kind of opposite of what we're taught that how men should be, and men should lead themselves. We should just push through whatever, you know, just ignore the emotion and just keep going to the kind of target and make the results happen type of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just, yeah, the more that I've like, again, slowing down to speed up, like getting in tune and stuff like that. Well, it's like, yeah, when my emotions come up and it feels like a challenging emotion. It's like, well, I have the ability to be able to like process that emotion. And then through processing that emotion, when I'm moving towards that target, if there is something I'm trying to achieve, well, I'm in a better place to do it. Again, it's always a false economy when we're like side skirting what's going on within ourselves, or when sometimes people say like, yeah, like I don't have that thing anymore, or I've overcome it, or whatever it is. It's like, no, you've just gone through it. And it's like, can we just keep going through it in a good way? And yeah, that for me has been, that's been the biggest thing for me the last few years, and it kind of leads on to what we were talking about a bit before we started, which is, yeah, like when you do that, especially at an emotional level, you develop a much bigger capacity to hold. Because if you're holding yourself in your emotions, well, then, when your kid starts having like a huge tantrum, which can be fucking annoying, like when you're like in the middle of some place and you really need to get somewhere to do something, and my son just like won't put on any clothes, and I'm just like, bro, you're naked all the time, man. Just come on, man. Just put on the sandals and a vest, bro. Like you can be, that's what it is with my son. My son wants to be naked everywhere. I guess he's an island boy, but it's like, through that work that I was just talking about with the self-leadership, I can hold the emotions better and be like, okay, I'm not going to lose it now. What does he need? He's asking me to come into connection with him. How do I do that? How do I explain it to him? Whatever. And then you develop that capacity. And then on top of the capacity, for me, it's like the range, it's like all the different emotions that we might feel. So we might have like anger or sadness or whatever it is. And I feel that when we develop the range to experience and hold all these emotions, we can then turn them into like energy, so like for me, my anger becomes my creativity and my inspiration. It's like, oh, I'm feeling that heat. Cool. What fire am I making with that heat? So it's like, that's what it is. The levels for me, it's like the self-leadership, and then it moves into that space.
And I love that you said there, the range and capacity, because it's like, we often, traditionally men, they have a very small range, right, of feeling, of self-expression as well, right? So it's like in that moment with your little boy where he doesn't want to put any clothes on, the capacity is small because we can't feel, we don't have the range of feeling and sensitivity. And our sensitivity isn't resting on them. We're just thinking about what we want and how we want things to be. And it's like their tantrum is met with a tantrum of our own of like, just put your clothes on. You're going to do this, like force, like put the sandals on by force, t-shirt by force, like you're in the baby seat, you get in the car kind of thing. And obviously there's times where that is also necessary, but like having the, as you said there, the range to be like, what does this moment call for? What's this moment calling out of me? The moment is calling out of me to, maybe I can come into connection through a playfulness with him. Maybe he just wants one moment of like, I'm going to stand here, Nate, I'm going to try and put his shoes on, and he can put my shoes on, and we can do it that way. Or it's like that, I call it kind of like having, like you said, the range to respond to the moment in what's needed. And that self, it's gone from self-leadership into leadership with your son there. And like, it's not just having one tool in the toolbox, it's having lots of different tools to what's needed in the moment, right? But it requires a kind of sensitivity, a feeling sensitivity there to rest our awareness on someone else. And I'm just like, then translating that into, you can take that into the workplace. Like, maybe you're a leader of people and someone in your team is struggling, right? But if you don't have that range and sensitivity, you will ignore their struggle, right? Or you'll just respond to it in the very particular way you've always done. But if you've got the kind of range and sensitivity, you might be like, wow, there's something going on with this person. Like maybe this person doesn't need me to bring them into a meeting room and go, hey, how is everything? Maybe this person needs me to go, hey, should we go for a walk outside? And just have a conversation and be like, what's there for you or whatever it is. And we have different ways of leading people in different moments based on what's really required of us, and what's kind of would bring, as John Warner would say, like what can liberate in that moment, what can liberate love or liberate connection or liberate something in the other person.
100%. And it's like, if you haven't gone to those places within yourself, so like I love that, by the way. That's like exactly as I see it as well. It's like, if it's a really difficult moment at work, it's like, and everyone's really down, maybe you've had to let some people go or something. It's like knowing which emotion to use. It's like, okay, is that like playfulness coming through? Is it the time for that yet? Is it time to lift everyone? Or actually, I can think about times like this, having some really tough times in with teams that I was leading in companies, and me actually sharing my vulnerability and my sadness at the situation gave them full permission to feel it. And then it was like, okay, the next day, cool. Now I know that we're in a space where they're ready for more of that like playful, activating energy and stuff like that, right? So it's the range. And ultimately, I believe a lot of leadership now, this is just the thoughts and the learnings that are crystallizing from the work that I'm doing, is like, leadership can really just be sharing emotions with people. Because like, yes, an important part of leadership is what you say and what you do, right? Like the words you're saying, what you're communicating, how you role model, that's important. But really one of the biggest drivers I feel for people seeing you as a leader and following you is how you make them feel. And for me, the best way to make people feel is to let them into my emotional world. And that was, when we again go back to like that evolution that I felt in leadership, I remember having some really tough times at one of the companies I was working on. And I just thought, you know what, like I'm holding a lot. Like I know that I'm meant to be this like bulletproof leader, or I've told myself that I'm just going to let them in. And it was like, boom. In that moment, something happened where those people and myself as the leader, we almost made like an emotional contract to really support each other and work together in a deeper and more like, we were just way more effective, right? And then I was like, oh, okay, so there's this thing with leadership that when you share the emotion, I think there's also a thing to say on this, that like share the emotion in a productive way. There's a difference between sharing it in a productive way and just like spilling, So that's about holding the masculine energy of like, how much is it, and not overthinking it, but masculine, firm, like have that intuition and be guided and have some structure. But yeah, man, like, I guess I would leave it on that topic as like really a big part of leadership is just being able to share your emotions with others. And then comes maybe the directive energy. When they feel that feeling, you can then go and direct on what the next thing is that needs to happen.
It's like really allowing yourself to connect to someone as a person, human to human, instead of like leader subordinate.
That's it. Yeah, because we're all, it's like, we're all the same. It's like what I really see now, and like I'll go and, I've been blessed to have some amazing teachers, especially in the men's workspace, work with some amazing men. And I remember the first time that I started going into those spaces and I was like, whoa, these guys are like they're like the Fantastic Four or whatever. Like these guys are Marvel characters. Like they don't fucking exist. Some of these guys. I was like, can you really be like that? Like the way I saw what they were doing, And it was like, in myself, I then started to create a bit of a pedestal, right? I was like, oh, that's the pedestal. And then I realized it's not a pedestal. Sometimes we meet someone, man or woman or whatever, and we see someone who's cultivated something within themselves that we want to cultivate. And that's a blessing. So it's like if I look at you, David, and I'm like, wow, this guy's really cultivated some mastery and some depth around relationships and intimacy. I don't have that. So I look at you and I see that and I'm like, oh, well, I would really like to cultivate that. How can I do that? Oh, I can have conversations with David. I could go and like do one of David's courses or something like that, and that's a beautiful way of where we don't create pedestals, and there can be hierarchy in some situations that's necessary, but we create this sacred reciprocity where it's like, you've cultivated something that I want to learn from you. And then look at me, is there anything that I've cultivated? And we learn from each other together. And it's like, that's the mindset that creates powerful teams and powerful communities and alignment for me.
Because it also removes that, it removes competition. It's not about like being better than. It's like, oh, someone has it kind of takes us back to like village life in a way. It's like someone has a skill that I want. Let me learn that skill from that person so I can be better. And I also give them an opportunity to teach that skill. And that can be a really beautiful opportunity instead of kind of looking things as like a zero-sum game of like, oh, I want what they've got. How can I take that from them in some way to be better than them? It's like really shifting out of the very capitalist mindset, isn't it? Of like zero sum. If I win, they lose, into like, oh, if I win and they win, then we all winning.
That's it, man. And it's like the more that, again, like that's been the kind of energy of which I've invited into my life, the more I just see so many like blessings and so much more happiness. Because, and don't get me wrong, again, it's like that will come up. Like sometimes then I might see something and I'm like, oh, I feel lack within myself. Like I want that, and it's like I can feel that feeling of like, oh, I want to take it. But then I'm checking in with myself and I'm like, when has that ever really worked for me? Because it's kind of like whack-a-mole. Maybe you take that thing and you acquire it and you win and they lose, but then it's like something else emerges within my life that's then completely out of alignment and connected. And I'm like, oh, okay, I see. So it's like, again, I guess that's kind of a little bit karmic, the way that I see it, but it's like, how can we all win together, And I really believe, again, on the topic of leadership, like the best leaders that I've experienced and been fortunate enough to have been led by are the ones who really rise up the people that they're leading, and it's like when you do that and rise up and also knows when to like adjust you and tell you, hey, no, that's what I'm seeing, like you're out of alignment there or something like that. And then also when they can accept the feedback, that's a really important thing. Like if as a leader, you're not getting that feedback, if as a partner in a relationship, you're not getting that feedback, that's a massive part of self-awareness because it's the external part of self-awareness, So it's like leadership in all situations, in relationship, in the bedroom, whatever it is. Like to me, it's all leadership. So although I didn't want to call myself a leadership coach because I was like, fuck, there's so many of those people out there. I was like, oh, how can I think of a better name for this? And I was like, no, like leadership for me is a big focal point of my life. And I like having something that you can really relate to every situation and use as a lens. And then there's other lenses too. But it's a beautiful lens for me. So yeah.
And I love the piece there about feedback. I think is really important. I was saying to the group of men I'm working with last night, and I said, if you want to really learn about yourself, ask for really honest feedback from people who spend a lot of time with you and you interact with a lot. I was like, as much as it will be painful, right? And I said to them, it might be your partners, it might be your work colleagues, it might be a friend. They see things about you that you cannot see because you have eyes that look outward and you have ears that listen more to the world than to listen to yourself. And you're not going to see your patterns and habits that are destructive to your own life and to the people you interact with. So if you start to really pay attention, like ask for feedback, honest feedback from people, your level of self-awareness will increase quite rapidly because you're going to learn these things about you. And it's no different in our leadership qualities, like asking really honest questions from the people that we lead and of ourselves to like really learn about ourselves to be better leaders of ourselves or of groups of people.
And then I always say there's like a correlation point. So it's like, when it comes to like introspection, is what I'm feeling, is what I'm like sensing and feeling within myself. Well, how does that compare to what the external view is? And and you have to have discernment because there's going to be people out there that are going to try and like bash you with feedback, or they're not going to deliver it well, or they're actually just spewing out their own shit on you, right? There has to be a discernment, but I kind of see that in my life. Like when I'm in alignment or out of alignment, I'm like, is what I'm hearing externally, is how people are perceiving me matching up to what I'm feeling like and perceiving of myself inside? And then I'm like, oh, I can see like there's a misalignment there, or like, oh, there's really good alignment. And I'm like, okay, how do I go a bit deeper into that, And it's like, that's where the kind of circle of self-awareness, I think, becomes really, really powerful. And yeah, I especially think in relationship, you'll, I'm sure, know a lot about this, but like, I always felt, so me and my partner met when we were working at Monzo, and then we ran a business together. It's quite intense. So we had kind of established that like feedbacky, worky kind of relationship. And like, she did a post about this the other day on Instagram, but it's like, when it comes to like thinking about values and having like a family offsite or those things, like actually, yeah, to me at first I was like, no, I don't want to do that. That's so like cringy. But then I'm like, no, like I've gone into organizations and I've learned all of these amazing tools like that as well. And it's like, well, why would I not do that with my partner, with the person that I'm building like the most important thing with, which is like the home, the thing like that. So it's like, also my invitation for anyone listening would be like, use all the tools you have, don't compartmentalize your life that like feedback isn't important both at work and at home,
Yeah. And I love that because I actually saw that post and read it and was like, oh yeah, fuck, like having like family values and family agreements, like is a really good, really strong idea. because me and my partner, we basically do a sprint review of our relationship every month. And it's very funny because when I don't know how I stumbled on it. I stumbled on an article, and it was a couple, and like she was a scrum manager and he's like a dev lead, and they were talking about it, and I was like, I'm not sure how I feel about doing this, but like it feels like a good idea. And I brought it to her, and she loves process. My girlfriend loves process. She's super structured, and she was like, no, I don't want to do it. And it took a little while for me to be like, hey, like I think this would be really good, blah blah blah. And we've been doing it for basically 3 years, right, in our relationship.
Wow.
And every month we sit down and we keep our own notes throughout the month, and we sit down and we answer like 5 or 6 questions. Some of them are really simple, like what's been going well, what's not been going so well, what do we want to change, like, you know, when do you felt most loved, and so forth in our relationship. And what it's really done is very similar to what was happening in sprint teams. It means that we give each other praise. There's a lot of positive feedback in terms of what's going well. And when something's like not going well, we like, this thing's not going well. We add it to an agenda. We talk about it like after we've gone through everything. But we find that our relationship is just so much smoother because any kind of difficulties that come up, we know there's a space for us to talk about them. We know that there's a dedicated space every month. Instead of, say, if something comes up in like midway through the month, if we didn't know there was a space for it, the part of our mind starts to go, when am I going to talk about this? Oh, this needs to get resolved. Whereas we're just like, we write in a note on our phone individually, and we're going to sit down and talk about it. But what it's done is actually, it's given us a lot of capacity through the month to just do what we're doing, working and so forth. And then when that time comes to sit down together, like I'd say 95% of the time, it's like us just celebrating each other, our relationship, what we love, and also tweaking little things that we're like, yeah, that's not working that well. Like, how can we change that? Like, you know, one of the most common things is like, we're working too much. How can we work less? Like, what do we need to do to spend more like proper quality time together? And sometimes we put stuff in play like, okay, like, all right, no talking about work when we get into bed, or after we finish on a weekend, like on a Saturday, no talking about work and coaching people. And then there needs to be some accountability from one of us or both of us in those moments. But like that little process there has made our relationship function so much better. So it's like bring those tools that you've perfected either in your relationship or in your work that you see that work really well, like you talked about the offsite, and bring them into your relationship for like ways to actually like make that more connected, more loving, more open, more honest. Like it really does help. And we've worked through that with a number of couples who have had resistance, and it's really helped them as well.
I love that. See, that's where the integration of like your world and the product development and the tech world, and then being like a relationship and intimacy coach is like, yeah, these two things work. The thing that came up for me there, and I've experienced this in my own relationship, and one of the big challenges we had to move through was resentment. You know, my partner held a lot of resentment, and it can come back sometimes where, you know, she felt that I wasn't able to show up for her in a very difficult situation. Her sister passed away quite tragically. And there was that, and just, you know, I was in my own stuff, and she felt resentment. And we've done something similar, but we've done like the weekly family meeting with the kind of questions of like, what's been left unsaid? You know, when are we going to have a date night? When are we going to have sex? Like those types of things, right? We've done it on and off as well. And it's like, I really experienced in that moment that resentment can be one of the biggest killers of relationships. I don't know if you agree with that, or you're nodding.
Yeah, totally.
And what that process that you're talking about does is, for me, it's like a tap. It's like things build up, and like, yes, you're able to, I'm not saying that it's not like you don't then see each other for the whole month and you're not also relating, communicating, solving, connecting, all of those things. But it just means that at least once a month or once a week, however you want to do it, there's like this big kind of, you know, cool, empty the bucket, like what needs to be said, and you're kind of clearing the pipes. And it's like the big thing that came through for me when you were saying that, the big word that was just like screaming in my heart was like intention. It's intention. It's like when we put intention to something, when we take action, when we actually really like, again, like use that awareness to put intention into something, it's like shit just dramatically shifts. Because I know that when I'm not putting intention into my relationship and I'm getting caught on other things and I'm not actually thinking like, what does my partner really need this week, or asking her, I know that then I'm like, oh, maybe it's a bit crunchy. Why is that? It's because we're not connected, you know, we're separated and we haven't made that connection point. So it's like, yeah, for me, it's like always that invitation of how can you bring more intention to everything you do, your relationship? How can you wake up in the morning and, when we spoke about morning routines, it doesn't have to be an hour like Vipassana meditation followed by crushing a workout and like being Tony Robbins. It could just be sitting for a moment and just saying, what's my intention today? What really needs that attention from my intention, And that's just like, even that, it's like already you're changing your whole day because you're just slowing down, taking a step back and asking the world and your life what it requires from you, and having the intention to meet it. So yeah, I love that, man. I'm going to have to get like a Kanban board on Notion and be like, go home and be like, we're doing this thing.
Oh man. But it is, I love that intention. Like intention is so, so powerful and like expands, everything, relationship, our work, our businesses, our leadership. It's like just stopping for a moment, as you said there, and being like, what is my intention? What is, we go into a meeting, for instance, it's like, what's like, I think this is something that I've had with a few people I've worked with in the last couple of years is like at the beginning of meetings, they'll be like, they'll say to you like, what's the intention of this meeting is what I'd like to get out of this meeting is this and this. Like, what would you like to get out of this meeting? And it just shifts. It's like a magical device that like goes, okay, we're all now like aware of what we want out of this. And it removes that kind of like shadowy where someone's got like a hidden agenda or they want something. And it's like, well, no, we just put all our cards on the table and be like, this is what we'd like to know. And it means that everyone can leave feeling satisfied and cared for. And if they're not satisfied because we didn't reach their intention, then we're all actually also clear at the end of the meeting, like, we can see, like, do we feel like, 5 minutes before the end, like, do we feel like everyone's intentions were met here? Like, is there anyone who doesn't feel that? I mean, we can have some space for that right now, or we can schedule something else later. It's like, it's just that intentionality, that awareness, that almost like care, actually, for people's like nervous system, for their well-being, for their needs.
Yeah, and a powerful one that just came up for me as you were saying that is like, some of the work that I do on my own experiences that I run, and then also when I'm leading retreats with like Sacred Sons or trainings, as we call them, is, we'll be doing very deep, like shadow work, process work, where, you're taking someone very deep into a part of their body, into emotions, into trauma, very difficult, lots of different things can be happening. And something that came through for me in the last 6 months that links to this is, often they're actually doing their own healing work. You're just sort of there to guide, to touch them, to ask the questions or whatever. And sometimes those processes, what can happen is people can go from being in their heart to their head, and then they get lost. And even just this one question of like, what needs to happen here? What's your intention? If they've lost it and they were like in the process and they've lost it, it can just take them straight back. Because in that moment, they're like, well, I'm here. And it's like, oh, I feel this energy in my chest. I need to move. Like, oh, my chair fell back. I need to move it, right? So nearly disappeared there. But so it's like you said, we often think, that the change happens in these big sweeping moments, but it's the consistent sum of the little things, the pauses, the breaths, the questions. And that's why when, a client will say to me, oh, I'm really struggling to like do this thing that you set or that we've come up with together, and I just keep missing it. And then I'm getting into the guilt and I'm feeling I should have been doing it. And I'm like, okay, well, you have the awareness of that now. What's the adjustment? Maybe it's like you said, 2 minutes, breath of fire. Don't need to be 10 minutes meditation and journaling. 2 minutes. You're telling me 2 minutes? Is that a good adjustment to just start you somewhere? So it's like, it's so like the intricacies, and it kind of, in a way, when I look at it that way, I'm like, oh, it's quite easy. It's obviously not always quite easy, but really you can bring and cultivate just like a better life for yourself through these very small moments. That's how it started for me. I was like, little by little,
And kind of like what's kind of come up for me there is, I've been saying a lot to people recently working with, is like, your relationship isn't destroyed in these big moments, a bit like what you said. Actually, it's a death by 1,000 cuts, right? It's death, but like enlightenment isn't these big profound moments, right? It's 1,000 little moments of commitment and dedication and practice, right, that lead to enlightenment, for instance, or it can be whatever thing it is you want. Like what I'm hearing you say, it's like, it's those tiny decisions and choices we make every day in each moment that really determine the path that we, or the end of our path, or the results that we get to along that path. Like, it is just these tiny little things. It's not the big things. It's the tiny little decisions we make every morning to get up and meditate, get up to connect our intention, to hug our partner and send a little bit of love. Like, these are the little bit of moments that you really get to choose the direction of your life. And if you're not aware, or you're not intentional, you're not always gonna make the choice that you really want to be making, right? And I'm kind of hearing from you, and this is what my experience of coaching people is that it's the tiny, I'm looking for like these little tiny things to like adjust you, that like move you like 0.0 degree, that really start to affect your life in the long term.
And that point, and that's so, and you know, you may have experienced this as a coach. I know I have. Is like sometimes, you know, whether I'm in a session or I'm in like a sequence of sessions with someone, and you know, maybe we've had like quite a big hit straight away where something's like shifted. Then we have a few sessions where we're kind of navigating this kind of murky water, and I feel this in myself. I'm like, ooh, okay, like how well am I like guiding this? What's you know, I'm trying to work out what I can do, right? And then it's like you said that it's like, you know, it's like that tiny degree shift. I think there's that like, you know, seen some videos where people like hit a huge rock just in this tiny specific spot, and then it just like shatters. Wow. You know what I mean, right? So it's like these tiny little degree adjustments, and I don't even maybe like, you know, I think, oh, okay, we'll just go here, and then it's like boom, you know. So it's really the small things, and the big word that came up for me there is like trust. Whether you're coaching and you're the coach, whether you're being coached, whether you're the person who's just starting out on this journey, like it doesn't have to look a certain way just because I do it this way, or you know, this is how my spiritual practice looks or my relationship practice. It doesn't have to look a certain way. Like, you're going to find your tiny degree adjustments that are going to make the most impact for you. And I think it's just like following it and trusting it, because it can feel frustrating, right? We're trying to change, we're trying to evolve, and it's like, fuck, why is this not happening? Like, I did the 10 minutes meditation, I did the thing, and it's like, life is not fucking linear, right? So it's like, trust that process, and you're going to just get to a point, and then it's going to go cool there, and then you might go down a bit and stuff like that. So again, it links back to that piece that I was saying around like, can you fully trust, can you fully engage and be present and wait for the big shifts, and also make the small changes. And the analogy that I sometimes use with my clients is like, I see you as like a pilot in the cockpit. And there's like, you know, when you look in a cockpit, if you're ever getting off a plane and you see the cockpit, I'm like, fuck, how do these guys do that? There's hella buttons in there. Like, how the fuck do they do that shit? How do they learn that? And it's like, that's how when I look at self-leadership, it's like, can I get to know those little buttons and those little things? And can I like, and then it's like, eventually you're like, well, cool. Like I'm a pretty good like fighter pilot now, or like whatever it is. And it's like, you know, we need to get to know the cockpit that we're sitting in and what the buttons are and the things and the small changes that mean that we get to the destination, but obviously enjoying the journey is the important part.
I love that analogy, man. That's a beautiful analogy. I love that.
Yeah, that's how I just picture it in my mind. It's like me going crazy in some cockpit, like all this crazy shit.
Oh, I love that, man. I love that. I feel like we could talk about this stuff all day.
Yeah, we could go for a long time.
But we really covered a really beautiful breadth of like masculine leadership and how the future of masculine leadership, you know, in companies, and how that can affect our lives and our relationships. You know, imagining the listeners are like, okay, how can we talk more with Jack? How can I get Jack into my company? Or, you know, there's probably some company leaders wanting to know, like, how can I work with Jack one-to-one? I'd love you to tell the listeners how people can work with you and contact you. And also, I know you've got a few bits and pieces coming up as well over the next few months.
Yeah, appreciate it. So my website is jackvilliers.com. I'm sure I can send it to you to put in the show notes. And that has like all the different things that I'm doing, whether it's one-to-one coaching, whether it's like organizations. I do offsites, workshops, lots of talks on the kind of stuff we're talking about, but leadership, mental health, masculinity, all of that sort of thing. So yeah, best place is to hit me up there. And if you're interested, you can shoot me an email really easily. The next thing that I have coming up is I call it an experience or a training in Ibiza on the 4th and 5th of November. It's for both men and women. And it's essentially doing a lot of deep shadow work, emotional release, integration, relational work. It's essentially like we've just been talking about. It's like finding those little degree shifts to open new pathways for yourself, to release things that you no longer need, to get some perspective. So that will be in Ibiza on the 4th and 5th of November, which, you can find a link to on my website. But yeah, really enjoying doing that stuff in person. That for me is like, just a beautiful zone to go in and be really connected with people doing that work. And that's pretty much it. That's kind of what I'm doing right now. And just also, for me, it's a piece right now, like slowing down, because I moved to Ibiza a year ago, and like that was like someone slamming the brakes on. When you live in a place where it takes like 3 hours to get your car cleaned and Amazon parcels take 2 weeks. I know Ibiza's not like super off grid, but like it's island life, as you all know, is like a different pace. So that was really how I helped myself kind of slow down. So yeah, I'm out here and doing a lot in person and then stuff online, but just, check out my website basically.
Awesome. Wow. Thank you, brother, man. Thank you for your incredible wisdom and this weaving conversation through, and just like really transmitting what this new paradigm of masculine leadership can look like. It's masculine self-leadership, masculine leadership in the workplace, but also, we really touched on the relational space as well. So yeah, man, big thank you to you for the work you do, and just, showing up in this way, and your journey, man. The journey you've been on has been quite a journey.
Yeah, thank you, man. And yeah, appreciate your time too. And this feels really amazing for me, like to meet someone else who's kind of walking that path. And then, we have a connection because we've experienced that same thing. And yeah, I'm just really grateful for what you're doing, because I really feel, and it's a space again that I'm trying to develop more mastery. But like, I feel like the relationship and intimacy space has really been like dying for men to come in and do it with that new paradigm that you're also holding. So yeah, I'm really grateful to see that, because I think it's an area that just, it fucking needs it, and I know I need it. So I'm like grateful that you're doing it.
Thank you, brother. Thank you, man. And listeners, hope you've enjoyed this episode. Would love to hear from you. Feel free to reach out, Instagram to, chat about what you've taken from the episode. Always love listening, hearing from you about your takeaways and learnings we've been able to implement from it. And I'm sure Jack would love to hear from you too. All the links and so forth that Jack mentioned are in the show notes just below. But until next week, ciao, ciao. I want to say a big thank you for listening. It's people like yourself that really help get the podcast out into the world, especially if you're often sharing the episodes and the podcast with people that you feel just could do with listening, right? Can see a different way of being a man, maybe a different way of having dating lives and intimacy and relationships. So I want to say a big thank you. And if maybe after listening to this episode, you think, there's someone actually who could really do with this, please share it with them, share the love. I'm really, really grateful. And if, you want to get in contact with me for any questions, or you want to talk about coaching or any working together, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram at theauthenticman_, or you can email me hello@theauthenticman.net. Thank you very much.